The clock above the counter read 11:50 when the black cars pulled into the gravel lot outside the diner, and Elena Marsh felt her stomach tighten before she even understood why. 6 vehicles. No sirens, no lights. Just the low growl of engines cutting off one after another in perfect order, like a machine folding itself closed. She had worked the night shift at the Roadstop Diner for almost 2 years, and in that time she had seen truckers, drifters, lovers running from something, and a few people who looked like they carried more trouble behind their eyes than in front of them. But she had never seen anything like this. The first man who stepped out wore a long gray coat despite the warm night air, and he scanned the parking lot the way a hawk studies a field before it decides where to land. 4 more men followed him, spreading out along the edge of the lot, not talking, not looking at each other, only watching. And then, last of all, a tall man stepped out of the middle car. He did not look like someone who needed 6 vehicles and 5 guards. He looked tired. His shoulders carried a kind of weight that had nothing to do with muscle, the kind of weight that comes from long nights and longer decisions. He wore a dark jacket, simple and clean, and his eyes moved across the diner windows with the practiced calm of someone who had learned, a long time ago, never to walk into a room without knowing every exit first. Elena did not know his name. She did not know that the people in this town called him the Alpha King, or that 3 attempts had already been made on his life that year, each one quieter and more dangerous than the last. All she knew was that something about him made the hair on her arms rise, and that his presence pulled the air out of the room the second the door chimed open. "Table for 1, he said, his voice low and even, and Elena nodded and led him to the corner booth, the one with the clearest view of both the front door and the kitchen. She noticed that he chose to sit facing the door himself, without being told which seat gave the best view. That was the first small detail that told her this man was used to danger, the way other people were used to rain. The diner was mostly empty at this hour, just an old trucker asleep over his coffee near the window, and a young couple sharing fries in a booth by the jukebox. The overhead lights hummed the same tired hum they always did, and the smell of fried onions drifted from the kitchen, where Carl, the night cook, was scraping down the grill. Everything looked ordinary, and yet Elena's hands felt unsteady as she set a menu down in front of the stranger. "Coffee, please," he said. "Black, coming right up." She walked back to the counter, aware of the 4 men who had taken up quiet positions near the windows, not eating, not drinking, only watching the parking lot and the road beyond it, like men who expected trouble to arrive at any moment. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw, kept glancing toward the man in the booth every few seconds, checking on him the way a soldier checks on a commanding officer. Elena poured the coffee with careful hands and carried it back to the booth. As she set it down, she noticed the stranger's eyes flick briefly to her name tag, then to her face, as though memorizing her the way he memorized everything else in the room. "Thank you," he said. And for a moment, just a moment, something in his expression softened, as if he had not expected kindness tonight and was mildly surprised to receive it. She returned to the counter to start on an order for the young couple, but her eyes kept drifting back toward the corner booth. There was something about the air near that table, something she could not name. She had grown up watching her mother work long shifts in similar diners, learning early how to read a room, how to sense which customers were simply hungry, and which ones carried something heavier beneath the surface. Tonight, every instinct she owned was telling her that the man in the booth was carrying something heavier than most. 10 minutes later, one of the guards approached the counter. He was younger than the others, with sharp eyes and a stiff posture that suggested military training, though not of any kind Elena recognized. "Can we get 4 coffees and something small?" he said. "Whatever's fastest." Of course. As she prepared the tray, she glanced toward the kitchen window, where Carl was working the grill with his back to the counter. Nothing unusual. And yet, when she turned to grab a clean glass from beneath the counter for the guard's water request, something made her pause. The glass rack sat exactly where it always did. The ice machine hummed its familiar hum. But there was a strange smell in the air near the counter, faint and sharp, almost like bitter almonds mixed with something chemical, gone as quickly as it came. She told herself it was nothing, maybe cleaning solution, maybe something from the dish pit. She shook the thought away and carried the tray of coffees to the booth, where the men sat near the window. When she returned to the counter, she noticed something that made her stop entirely. A second waitress, a woman named Priya who worked the register on nights when the diner got busy, had stepped away from her station just moments earlier to answer a phone call in the back hallway. In that short window of time, a glass of water had been placed at the counter's edge, one that Elena had not prepared, and one that was now sitting exactly where the guard's tray had been resting only minutes before, close enough to the stranger's booth that it would be easy, almost natural, for someone passing by to set it down in front of him instead of the coffee he had already been served. Elena frowned at the glass. She had not made it. Carl had not made it. Priya, from what she could tell through the pass-through window, had not made it either. She picked it up carefully, holding it near the light above the counter, and looked at the water inside. It looked clear, ordinary, unremarkable in every visible way. But that same faint, bitter smell drifted up from the surface, sharper now that the glass was close to her face, and something cold moved through her chest, a feeling she could not explain with logic, but could not ignore either. She thought about setting it back down. She thought about pretending she had not noticed anything at all, the way most people would have, the way most people are trained to do when the world in front of them looks calm and orderly and safe. But something in her refused to let it go. Some old instinct, some quiet voice from years of watching her mother navigate rooms full of strangers, told her that calm surfaces sometimes hid the most dangerous things. She glanced toward the booth. The stranger was speaking quietly with one of his men, his coffee cup nearly empty in front of him, his attention fixed on whatever conversation was unfolding at low volume between them. No one was watching the counter. No one was watching her. Elena made a decision in that instant, quick and quiet. The kind of decision that takes less than 3 seconds, but changes the shape of everything that follows. She reached beneath the counter, grabbed a clean glass, filled it with fresh water from the pitcher she trusted, the one she had filled herself only 20 minutes earlier, and set the strange glass aside, wrapped inside a folded towel, tucked out of sight beneath the counter, where no one would think to look for it. She carried the fresh glass to the booth and set it down near the stranger's coffee cup, saying nothing, drawing no attention to the switch, moving with the same practiced calm she used for 100 other small tasks each night. The stranger glanced up at her briefly, murmured a quiet word of thanks, and returned to his conversation. Elena walked back to the counter with her heart beating faster than it should have been beating for something so small. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself the whole thing was probably nothing, some odd smell from a cleaning product, some trick of imagination brought on by a long, tiring shift. And yet she did not throw the strange glass away. She left it exactly where it was, hidden beneath the counter, wrapped in its towel, untouched. She busied herself with the young couple's order, refilled the trucker's coffee without waking him, wiped down an empty section of counter that did not particularly need wiping. She kept glancing toward the corner booth every few minutes, unable to fully shake the strange, tight feeling in her chest. The broad-shouldered guard with the scar along his jaw approached the counter again, a short while later, this time holding an empty coffee cup. "Mind topping this off?" he said, sliding the cup toward her. "Not at all." As she poured, she noticed his eyes drifting toward the same spot on the counter where the strange glass had briefly rested. He said nothing about it, but for half a second, his gaze lingered there a moment longer than casual curiosity would explain, and Elena felt that same cold feeling return, sharper this time. She handed him the refilled cup and watched him walk back toward the booth, sitting down near enough to the stranger to keep a careful, watchful distance without seeming close enough to intrude. As she turned back to her side of the counter, her eyes fell once more on the folded towel resting beneath it, hiding the glass she still could not explain. Somewhere outside, headlights swept briefly across the parking lot as a car passed on the highway beyond, and for a moment, the whole diner seemed unusually still, as though the building itself was holding its breath along with her. Elena did not know, not yet, exactly what she had just done. She only knew that something about tonight was different from every other night she had worked this shift, and that the strange, unexplained glass sitting quietly beneath the counter felt less like a mistake and more like a warning she had almost missed. The clock on the wall ticked forward, and the night rolled on, calm on the surface, and dangerous underneath, the way the most dangerous nights often are. The guard with the scar along his jaw was named Corin, though Elena did not yet know his name, and he was the one who reached for the coffee cup sitting closest to the edge of the table when the stranger stepped away for a brief moment to take a quiet phone call near the front entrance. It was a small, careless action, The kind people do 1,000 times a day without thinking, reaching for the nearest cup instead of waiting for their own. Except the cup he reached for was not his own coffee. It was the fresh glass of water Elena had placed in front of the stranger only minutes earlier, still nearly full, sitting exactly where anyone at that table might have mistaken it for shared water rather than a personal drink. He took one long sip and set the glass back down, unaware that anything unusual had happened. For a moment nothing changed. The diner continued its quiet hum of activity. The young couple by the jukebox laughed softly at something on one of their phones. The trucker near the window snored gently over his cold coffee, and Elena continued wiping down the far end of the counter, her mind still turning over the strange hidden glass beneath her hands. Then Corin's breathing changed. It started small, a slight catch in his throat, a brief cough that he waved off with his hand as though it were nothing more than a swallow gone wrong. But within seconds his face lost its color, draining from a healthy tan to a pale, waxy shade that made Elena's whole body go cold the instant she looked up and noticed it. His hand went to the table, gripping the edge hard enough that his knuckles turned white, and his breathing grew shallow and fast, like a man trying to run uphill with no air left in his lungs. "Corin?" one of the other guards said, his voice sharp with sudden alarm. Corin did not answer. He tried to stand, his legs buckling halfway up, and two of the other men lunged forward to catch him before he hit the floor, easing him down onto the booth seat as his body began to shake in small, uncontrollable tremors. His eyes rolled slightly, unfocused, searching for something to anchor onto and finding nothing. The diner, which had felt calm and slow only a heartbeat earlier, erupted into motion. The young couple by the jukebox stood up in alarm, backing toward the door. Carl came rushing out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, calling out to ask what was happening. The trucker woke with a start, blinking in confusion at the sudden noise. And the stranger, who had stepped only a few feet away to finish his phone call, turned at the sound of the commotion and saw one of his most trusted men collapsing at the very booth he himself had been sitting in only moments before. His face changed instantly. The calm, controlled expression he had worn since walking through the door vanished, replaced by something sharper, colder, and infinitely more alert. He crossed the distance to the booth in 3 long strides, kneeling beside Corin, checking his pulse with quick, practiced fingers, his jaw tightening as he registered how fast and weak it had become. "Get him outside, now," he ordered, his voice carrying an authority that made every man in the room move instantly, without question, without hesitation. 2 guards lifted Corin between them and carried him quickly through the front door toward the waiting cars, where someone was already speaking urgently into a phone, requesting help of a kind that had nothing to do with ordinary ambulances. The stranger remained crouched beside the booth for a moment longer, his eyes scanning the table, the glass, the coffee cup, piecing together in his mind exactly what had happened with the terrible clarity of a man who had lived through this kind of moment before. His gaze fell on the glass of water sitting nearly empty on the table, and something in his expression shifted from alarm to a colder, more dangerous kind of understanding. He looked up, and his eyes swept the diner until they landed on Elena, who stood frozen behind the counter, her hand still holding the towel she had been using to wipe down the surface, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. He did not shout, he did not accuse, he simply walked toward the counter with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving hers, and when he reached the counter, he set both hands flat against it and leaned forward slightly. "That water," he said quietly. "Did you bring that to our table?" Elena swallowed hard, her voice barely steady enough to answer. "There were 2 glasses. I don't know who made the first one. I didn't like the smell of it, so I switched it before it reached your table." "You switched it," he repeated, his voice carefully controlled, though something behind his eyes had gone very still, very sharp. "Yes," she said. "I thought I was being paranoid. I didn't want to make a scene. It smelled wrong. Bitter, almost like almonds, but not quite. I didn't think it was anything serious." "Where is the original glass?" Elena reached beneath the counter, her hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline of the moment had caught up to her, and pulled out the folded towel, setting it carefully on the counter between them. The stranger unwrapped it slowly, revealing the glass still sitting inside, nearly full, the water inside catching the overhead light in a way that looked, for one unsettling moment, almost too clear, too perfect, too still. He stared at it for a long moment without speaking, Then he looked back up at Elena, and something in his expression had changed entirely. The cold alertness replaced by something far more complicated, something that looked almost like disbelief. "You have no idea what you just did," he said quietly. "I don't understand," Elena said. "What's happening? Is your friend going to be all right?" "He will receive help," the stranger said. Though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty, he did not try to hide. "He drank from a glass that was meant for me." The words settled into the room slowly, and Elena felt the full weight of them arrive a beat later than the sound itself, the way distant thunder arrives after lightning has already flashed and gone. Meant for him. The bitter smell, the collapse, the urgency in the guard's movements. Pieces that had felt disconnected and strange only minutes earlier suddenly clicked together into a shape far darker than anything she had imagined, while standing quietly behind her counter on an ordinary Tuesday night. "Someone tried to poison you," she said slowly, testing the words, as though saying them aloud might somehow make them less true. "Yes," he said simply. Outside, through the front windows, Elena could see the guards loading Corin carefully into one of the vehicles. Another man speaking rapidly into a phone, his voice tense but controlled. Somewhere in the parking lot, a set of headlights swept across the gravel as a second car pulled forward, positioning itself near the entrance in a way that looked less like parking and more like guarding. "Why would anyone want to harm you?" Elena asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she understood she likely had no right to an answer, and no real ability to comprehend whatever answer he might give. The stranger studied her for a long moment, his eyes moving across her face the way they had earlier, memorizing, assessing, though now there was something new mixed into that careful attention, something that looked almost like respect. "That is a very long story," he said finally. "One I am not able to share with you tonight, but I need you to understand something clearly. What you did a few minutes ago, without knowing who I was, or why any of this matters, may have saved my life." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The diner around her still buzzed with quiet chaos, Carl hovering near the kitchen doorway with wide, uncertain eyes, the young couple standing near the exit unsure whether to leave or stay, the old trucker watching everything with the slow, blinking confusion of someone who had woken into the middle of events he could not begin to understand. "I need to know your name," the stranger said. "Elena," she said quietly. "Elena Marsh." He nodded slowly, as though committing the name to memory in some deeper, more permanent way than ordinary conversation required. "Elena Marsh," he repeated. "I am going to need to speak with you again, very soon. Tonight is not the time, but please understand, this is not something that ends simply because the cars leave." Before she could ask what he meant, one of the remaining guards appeared at his side, speaking low and urgent words she could not fully hear. Something about Corin's condition stabilizing enough for transport, something about needing to move quickly before word of the incident spread beyond these walls. The stranger's expression tightened, and for a moment, the careful calm he had maintained even in crisis cracked slightly, revealing something rawer underneath, something that looked, briefly, like fear not for himself, but for the man being carried out to the cars. "I have to go," he said, turning back to Elena one final time. "Do not speak of this to anyone. Not the police, not friends, not family. Not yet. I will make certain you understand why, very soon." And with that, he turned and walked quickly out through the front door, his remaining guards falling into position around him, with the same practiced, silent coordination they had shown upon arrival, though now every movement carried a new sharpness, a new urgency, born from the understanding that whatever quiet conflict was unfolding around this man had just claimed its first true casualty tonight, and had come far closer to claiming him. Elena stood behind the counter long after the last car pulled out of the lot, her hands still faintly trembling, the folded towel and its hidden glass sitting untouched before her, evidence of a danger she did not yet understand, and a decision that had, without her even realizing it in the moment, changed the direction of her entire life. Carl finally broke the silence, stepping toward the counter with wide, cautious eyes. "Elena," he said slowly, "what in the world just happened here?" She looked up at him, then back down at the glass, and found she had no answer that made any sense at all. Not yet, not to herself, and certainly not to him. Outside, the road stretched dark and quiet in both directions, the taillights of 6 black cars shrinking into the distance until they disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the hum of the diner's old sign and the sound of Elena's own heartbeat, still too fast, still trying to catch up with everything that had just occurred. Elena did not sleep that night, though she tried, lying on top of her covers with the ceiling fan turning slowly above her, replaying the events at the diner, over and over, until the images blurred together into something that felt more like a dream than a memory. The bitter smell of the water, the way Corin's face had lost its color in seconds, the stranger's eyes, sharp and unreadable, studying her as though she were a puzzle he had not expected to encounter tonight. By the time the sun rose over the tree line behind her small rented house, she had convinced herself that some of it must have been exaggerated by her own nerves, that surely the man's friend was simply unwell, that surely the whole strange episode would fade quietly into the background of ordinary life. That illusion lasted exactly until she stepped outside to walk to the corner store for milk and found a car parked across the street that she did not recognize, its engine off, a single figure seated behind the wheel, unmoving, watching the front of her house with the patient stillness of someone who had done this kind of waiting many times before. She stopped on her porch steps, her keys still in her hand, and stared at the car for a long moment. The driver did not move, did not acknowledge her, simply sat there, present but silent, like a shadow someone had left behind on purpose. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She did not recognize the number. She hesitated before answering, glancing once more at the parked car, and then pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" "Miss Marsh," said a voice she recognized instantly. Low, calm, the same voice that had thanked her quietly across a diner counter only hours before. "I apologize for the early hour, and for the car outside your home. I promise you, it is there for your protection, not to frighten you." "Protection from what?" Elena said, her voice sharper than she intended. Fear and confusion, mixing together into something that came out as frustration. "From the people who tried to harm me last night," the stranger said. "They now know their attempt failed, and they will want to understand why. That means they may try to learn who was near me when it happened. I could not, in good conscience, leave you unwatched while that possibility exists." Elena's grip on the phone tightened. "This is insane. I made you a glass of water. That's all I did. I don't understand why any of this is happening to me." "I know," the stranger said, his voice softening slightly, carrying an unexpected note of genuine regret. "And I am sorry for it. You did not ask to be part of this. But the truth is, you already are, whether either of us wishes it or not. I would like to meet with you today, somewhere safe, somewhere public if that would make you more comfortable, so that I can explain enough of the situation for you to understand the choices in front of you." "Choices," Elena repeated. "What choices?" "That is easier explained in person," he said. "There is a small tea house on Larkspur Avenue, not far from your home. I will be there at noon, alone, without the cars, without the men who frightened you last night. If you choose not to come, I will understand, and I will still make certain you remain safe. But I believe you deserve an explanation, and I would rather give it to you honestly than leave you guessing." Elena glanced once more at the parked car across the street, its driver still and watchful, and felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity settle into her chest, two feelings pulling against each other with equal strength. Whatever world this man belonged to, it had already reached into her ordinary life and left its fingerprints across everything she thought she understood about safety, chance, and coincidence. "Fine," she said finally. "Noon. But if this turns out to be some kind of trap, I want you to know I told my neighbor where I was going." A faint sound came through the phone, something that might have been a quiet, tired laugh. "That is a very reasonable precaution," he said. "I would expect nothing less from someone sharp enough to notice a poisoned glass before anyone else in the room did." The tea house on Larkspur Avenue was a small, quiet place with wide windows and soft lighting, the kind of establishment that attracted retirees reading newspapers and young professionals meeting for calm conversation over pastries. Elena arrived a few minutes early, choosing a table near the window where she could see the street outside, an old habit she had never quite been able to shake. The stranger arrived exactly at noon, dressed more casually than he had been at the diner, though something about the way he moved through the room, quiet, alert, aware of every exit and every face, told her that the danger surrounding him had not lessened simply because he had changed his jacket. He sat across from her, folding his hands on the table, and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "My name is Damien," he said. "Damien Voss." "Elena Marsh," she said. "Though you already knew that." "I did," he admitted. "I apologize for the imbalance. It felt important that you at least know mine in return." A waitress approached, and they ordered tea, the ordinary rhythm of the request feeling strangely surreal given everything that had happened only hours earlier. When the waitress left, Damien leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I lead an organization that many people misunderstand, and few outside of it fully comprehend," he said carefully. "It has enemies, powerful ones, some of whom have decided that removing me would benefit them a great deal. Last night was the third attempt this year. It was also the closest anyone has come to succeeding. Because of me," Elena said quietly. "Because of you," he confirmed. "I have people whose entire job is to test food and drink before it reaches me. Last night, in the chaos of an unplanned stop, that precaution was skipped. If you had not acted the way you did, I do not believe I would be sitting here right now." Elena stared down at her tea, steam curling gently from the surface, and tried to absorb the weight of what he was telling her. "What happened to your friend, Corin?" "He is recovering," Damien said, and something in his voice carried real relief. "The poison was potent, but caught in time. He will live. He will not soon forget what almost happened to him instead of me." "I'm glad," Elena said, and meant it. "The people responsible for this attempt know now that their plan failed," Damien continued. "They will investigate why. It is possible, though not certain, that they may eventually learn a waitress switched to glass at the right moment. If that happens, you could become a target simply for being an inconvenient witness to their failure." Elena's chest tightened. "So what am I supposed to do? Move? Disappear?" "No," Damien said firmly. "What I am offering is protection, quiet and unobtrusive, for as long as it takes to identify and remove the threat responsible. You will not need to change your life. You will not need to speak of any of this publicly. You will simply have people nearby, watching, in case anyone attempts to reach you." "And if I say no?" Elena asked. "If I tell you I want nothing to do with any of this?" Damien considered the question seriously, without offering a quick or dismissive answer. "Then I will respect that," he said finally. "But I will not stop watching over you entirely, even from a distance. I owe you my life. That is not a debt I am able to walk away from, regardless of what you decide." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of manipulation, any hint that his calm, careful words were simply a performance, designed to pull her deeper into a world she wanted no part of. But what she found instead was something quieter, more sincere, the tired honesty of a man who had spent so long surrounded by danger, that gratitude, when it arrived without pretense. "I don't want money," she said slowly. "I don't want attention. I just want my ordinary life back." "I understand," Damien said. "And I will do everything within my power to give you exactly that, while still keeping you safe." Outside the window, the street moved on in its ordinary rhythm. Cars passing, pedestrians walking with coffee cups and grocery bags, unaware of the quiet, dangerous conversation unfolding behind the glass. Elena looked out at that ordinary world for a long moment, feeling the strange, uncomfortable awareness that her place within it had shifted overnight, whether she wanted it to or not. "All right," she said finally. "Tell me what I need to know." Damien explained things slowly, carefully, choosing his words the way a man diffuses something delicate, aware that too much information delivered too quickly might overwhelm rather than clarify. He told her that his organization operated across several regions, that it managed resources, relationships, and disputes far beyond what most ordinary businesses handled, and that its size and influence made it a frequent target for rivals seeking to weaken it from within. He did not share every detail, and Elena sensed a deliberate carefulness in what he chose to reveal. But what he did share painted a picture of a world built on careful alliances, quiet rivalries, and occasional violence that rarely reached public attention. "There are people close to me," he said, "who benefit if I am removed. Some through inheritance of position, some through weakened leadership they believe they can exploit. I do not yet know which of them arranged last night's attempt, though I have suspicions." "Suspicions about people you trust?" Elena asked. "Trust is complicated in my world," Damien said. "I trust very few people completely. Corin was one of them. I intend to find whoever did this, and I intend to do so carefully, without accusing the wrong person simply because suspicion feels satisfying. Elena listened, absorbing every word, though a part of her still felt as though she were sitting inside someone else's story, a stranger's danger, borrowed briefly and uncomfortably into her own quiet life. "And where do I fit into all of this?" she asked. "Realistically, not in vague terms about protection. What does that actually look like for me?" Damien considered the question. "There will be someone nearby when you are at work," he said. "Not obviously, not in a way that disrupts your shift or draws attention. Someone will also be near your home in the evenings, at a distance, simply watching for anything unusual. If at any point you notice something that feels wrong, a car you do not recognize, a person paying too much attention, anything at all, I want you to contact me directly. Not the police, not friends, only me." "Why not the police?" Elena asked. "Because the people responsible for this operate far outside the reach of ordinary law enforcement," Damien said carefully. "Involving them could complicate matters in ways that endanger you further, rather than protect you." Elena frowned, uneasy with the implication but unable to fully argue against it, given everything she had already witnessed. "This is a lot to accept on faith," she said quietly. "I know," Damien said, "and I do not expect you to accept all of it easily. I only ask that you allow me the chance to prove, through actions rather than words, that I intend to keep my promise." Their tea sat mostly untouched between them, cooling slowly as their conversation continued, weaving through careful questions and careful answers, each testing the boundaries of what the other was willing to reveal. Elena found herself, despite her lingering unease, drawn to the quiet steadiness in Damien's manner, the way he answered difficult questions directly, rather than deflecting them, the way his gratitude toward her felt genuine rather than performed. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "With the people who did this, I intend to find them," Damien said, his voice quieter now, carrying an edge Elena had not heard from him before, something colder and more resolved. "Carefully, quietly, before they attempt anything else." "And when you find them?" Damien met her eyes steadily. "That is not something I can discuss with you, Elena, not out of disrespect, but because some parts of my world are simply not meant to be shared with someone standing outside it." Elena accepted the boundary without pushing further, sensing that some doors, once opened, could not easily be closed again, and that perhaps it was better, for now, to remain on the safer side of certain answers. They finished their tea in a quieter, more settled silence, the earlier tension between them easing slightly into something that resembled, however cautiously, the beginning of trust. As they stood to leave, Damien paused near the door, turning back toward her with an expression she had not yet seen from him, something almost hesitant. "I want you to know," he said, "that regardless of how this unfolds, what you did for me will not be forgotten. Not by me, and not by anyone within my organization who understands what almost happened last night." Elena nodded, uncertain how to respond to such a direct, unguarded statement of gratitude. "I just didn't want to see someone poisoned in front of me," she said honestly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Damien said quietly, "they would not have. Most people notice nothing at all. You noticed something wrong before it had fully revealed itself as wrong. That is rare, Elena. Rarer than you seem to understand." They stepped outside together, into the bright afternoon, the ordinary sounds of the street rising up around them, cars, distant laughter, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the block. Damien's driver waited a respectful distance away, near a car considerably less conspicuous than the ones that had arrived at the diner the night before. "I will be in touch," Damien said. "And Elena, please, try to continue your life as normally as possible. I do not wish for fear to take root where it does not need to." She watched him walk toward his car, his posture straight, controlled, though she noticed, just before he climbed inside, a brief moment where his shoulders dropped slightly, as though the calm composure he maintained in front of her required real effort to sustain. As his car pulled away down Larkspur Avenue, Elena remained standing outside the tea house for a long moment, turning the entire conversation over in her mind. Her ordinary life, the diner, the quiet rented house, the simple rhythm of shifts and paychecks, suddenly felt smaller, thinner, stretched over something far larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined existed just beneath its surface. She walked home slowly, aware now, in a way she had not been that morning, of every car that passed, every person who lingered a moment too long near a storefront window. The awareness did not feel entirely unpleasant, though it unsettled her deeply. It felt, instead, like waking up to a version of the world she had always sensed existed somewhere at the edges of ordinary life, glimpsed occasionally in rumors and news stories, but never expected to touch her own quiet existence so directly. That night, when she returned to the diner for her shift, she found herself glancing toward the parking lot more often than usual, half expecting, despite everything, that the black cars might return. They did not. The night passed quietly, ordinary customers arriving and leaving in their usual rhythm. Carl working the grill, Priya running the register, the old jukebox playing its familiar, comforting songs. But when Elena stepped outside during her break, she noticed, parked discreetly near the edge of the lot, a single dark sedan she did not recognize, its driver barely visible behind tinted windows, present but unobtrusive, exactly as Damien had promised. She did not approach it. She simply nodded once toward the vehicle, uncertain if the gesture would even be noticed, and returned inside to finish her shift, carrying with her the strange, unfamiliar comfort of being watched over by someone whose world she barely understood, but whose gratitude, at least, felt entirely genuine. 2 weeks passed in a strange, careful rhythm. Elena continued her shifts at the diner, and though her days looked outwardly unchanged, she carried within her a quiet awareness that had not existed before that night. An awareness of the dark sedan that occasionally appeared near the parking lot, of the careful distance kept by whoever Damien had assigned to watch over her, present but never intrusive, protective but never overwhelming. Damien himself visited twice during those 2 weeks, always during quieter hours, always sitting in the same corner booth, always ordering the same black coffee, though now Elena prepared it herself, rather than trusting anyone else in the kitchen with the task. Their conversations grew slightly easier each time, the careful formality of their first meetings softening into something more comfortable, though never entirely relaxed, given the shadow of danger that still lingered behind every visit. "Any progress finding who was responsible?" Elena asked during his second visit, keeping her voice low as she refilled his cup. "Some," Damien said carefully. "Nothing certain yet. These matters require patience. Acting too quickly on incomplete information risks accusing the wrong person, and in my world, that mistake carries consequences far heavier than simple embarrassment." "That sounds exhausting," Elena said honestly. "It is," Damien admitted, and something in his tired smile told her he rarely allowed himself such honesty in front of others. Their conversations, brief as they were, began to reveal small details about the man behind the careful composure. Elena learned that Damien had inherited his position at a young age, following circumstances he did not elaborate on, and that the weight of leadership had settled onto his shoulders long before he felt ready to carry it. She learned that Corin, now recovering steadily, had served alongside him since childhood, more brother than employee, and that the thought of losing him to a poison meant for someone else had shaken Damien more deeply than his composed exterior ever revealed. In turn, Damien learned small details about Elena's life as well. Her mother's long years working similar diners, her quiet determination to save enough eventually to attend evening classes in accounting, her small, tidy house that she rented alone, after her last relationship ended quietly and without drama nearly 2 years earlier. Neither of them spoke of anything beyond simple facts, careful conversation exchanged across a diner counter. And yet something unspoken had begun growing steadily between them, subtle and unacknowledged, the kind of quiet connection that forms not through grand gestures, but through repeated, ordinary moments shared honestly. It was during Damien's third visit that everything shifted again. He arrived later than usual, well past midnight, alone except for a single driver waiting outside, his expression carrying a tension Elena had not seen since the night of the poisoning. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, sliding into the booth. "Somewhere we won't be overheard." Elena glanced around the nearly empty diner, then nodded toward the small storage room behind the kitchen, rarely used this late at night. Once inside, away from the front windows, Damien's careful composure finally cracked slightly, revealing the strain he had clearly been carrying. "We identified the person responsible," he said, "for the poisoning." Elena's stomach tightened. "Who?" "A member of my own council," Damien said, his voice low and controlled, though anger simmered clearly beneath the surface. "Someone I trusted. Someone who had access to information about my movements that night. Information only a small circle would have known. What happens now? Elena asked carefully. That is being handled, Damien said, and something in his tone told her the details of that handling were not meant to be shared with her. But there is something else you need to know. This person, upon realizing their attempt had failed because of an unexpected interference at the diner, began asking questions. Quiet questions, careful ones, but questions nonetheless, about who was working that night, about staff schedules, about anyone unusual present at the counter. Elena felt the cold, familiar tightness return to her chest. They know about me. They suspect, Damien corrected, which in some ways is more dangerous than certainty, because uncertainty breeds recklessness. I increased your protection the moment I learned this, but I needed to tell you myself, rather than have you discover increased security around you without explanation. How dangerous is this, really? Elena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Damien hesitated, and that hesitation told her more than any words could have. Dangerous enough that I would feel considerably safer if you allowed me to move you somewhere more secure, at least temporarily, until this matter is fully resolved. Move me, Elena repeated. You mean leave my home, my job? Temporarily, Damien said again, though the word did little to soften the weight of what he was asking. I understand this is an enormous request, but Elena, I would rather ask too much of your patience than risk your safety. Elena crossed her arms, leaning against the wall of the small storage room, torn between the instinct to refuse outright and the quiet, undeniable fear that had been growing steadily since that first strange night. Give me a day to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Damien said. Take whatever time you need, but please, do not dismiss the seriousness of this too quickly. He left shortly afterward, his driver pulling away into the dark, quiet street, leaving Elena standing alone in the empty diner, the weight of an impossible decision settling heavily over her shoulders. She finished her shift mechanically, her mind elsewhere, replaying every interaction she'd had over the past 2 weeks, searching for any sign she might have missed, any indication that unfamiliar eyes had already begun watching her more closely than she realized. Walking home that night, she noticed the dark sedan parked in its usual spot near the corner, and for the first time since Damien's protection had begun, its presence brought her genuine comfort rather than mere curiosity. She nodded toward it briefly, before continuing on, aware, with a clarity she had not previously allowed herself, that whatever quiet, dangerous world Damien Voss inhabited had now fully, undeniably, reached into her own. That night, lying awake in her small, familiar bedroom, Elena found herself wrestling not just with fear, but with something else entirely, an unexpected reluctance to imagine simply disappearing from the ordinary life she had built, away from the careful, growing understanding that had begun forming between herself and a man whose world she barely comprehended, but whose gratitude, and perhaps something more than gratitude, had begun to matter to her more than she wanted to admit. Elena did not sleep well, and by morning, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not run. She would not abandon her home, her job, the small, steady life she had built with her own 2 hands over the past several years. But she also understood, with a clarity that had been growing steadily since that first strange night at the diner, that she could no longer pretend the danger surrounding Damien Voss had nothing to do with her. She called him shortly after sunrise, and he answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the alertness of someone who rarely slept deeply, even in quieter times. I'm not leaving, she said, without preamble, but I want you to be honest with me about everything going forward. No more careful half-explanations. If I'm going to be part of this, even from the edges, I need to actually understand what I'm part of. There was a brief pause on the line, and when Damien spoke again, his voice carried something that sounded almost like relief. That seems fair, he said, though I warn you, some of what you'll learn may be difficult to hear. I'd rather know than wonder, Elena said firmly. They met again that afternoon, this time at a quiet park bench overlooking a small pond, chosen deliberately for its openness, easy to watch, difficult to approach unnoticed. Damien arrived without his usual entourage, though Elena suspected, correctly, that unseen protection remained nearby regardless. He told her more this time, about the long history of rivalries within his organization, about the careful balance of power he had inherited and worked constantly to maintain, about the council member responsible for the poisoning, a man named Callum Gray, who had served for years in a position of trust, before allowing ambition to curdle into something far darker. Why did he do it? Elena asked. Gray believed leadership under his direction would be stronger, more aggressive, more willing to expand our influence through means I have always resisted, Damien said carefully. He viewed my caution as weakness. He decided the fastest way to correct that weakness was to remove me entirely. And now, Elena asked, what happens to him? He has been confronted, Damien said, choosing his words with obvious care. His position within the council has been revoked. He no longer holds influence, resources, or the trust of those who once supported him. That's it? Elena asked, surprised. He tried to kill you, and he just loses his job? Damien's expression darkened slightly. There are consequences beyond what I am able to share with you, Elena. Please understand, some of what happens within my world does not translate easily into terms you would recognize as fair, or complete, or satisfying. What matters most now is that Gray no longer has the standing or resources to attempt something like this again. Elena studied him carefully, sensing there was more beneath his careful words than he was willing to reveal, but she chose not to press further, understanding that some boundaries, however uncomfortable, existed for reasons she might never fully grasp. Does this mean I'm safe now? She asked instead. Safer, Damien said honestly. Gray's immediate threat has been neutralized, but he was not acting entirely alone. There were others who supported his ambitions quietly, from a distance, without directly participating in the attempt itself. I do not yet know all of their names. So this isn't over, Elena said. No, Damien admitted. Not entirely, which is why I would still like your permission to maintain your protection, even as your life continues normally. Elena considered this, watching a pair of ducks glide slowly across the still surface of the pond nearby. All right, she said finally. But I want to understand something else too. Why does this matter so much to you? My safety, I mean. You've already thanked me. You've already tried to protect me. What more is there? Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the water, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a rare, unguarded honesty. Because very few people in my life act out of instinct, rather than calculation, he said. Everyone around me measures their actions carefully, weighing benefit and risk before deciding how to behave. You acted without knowing who I was, without any expectation of reward, simply because something felt wrong to you. That kind of instinct, that kind of quiet integrity, is rarer in my world than you can possibly imagine. Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly at his words, unsure how to respond to such direct, unexpected sincerity. I just didn't want to see anyone hurt, she said quietly. That's all it was. I know, Damien said, turning to look at her fully now, which is precisely why it means so much. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the quiet park, and Elena found herself, despite every reasonable instinct telling her to remain cautious, genuinely enjoying his company, the steady, careful way he listened when she spoke, the dry humor that occasionally slipped through his controlled composure, the quiet respect he showed her opinions, even on matters far outside her ordinary experience. Can I ask you something else? She said eventually. Of course. Do you ever get tired of it, all of this? The constant danger, the careful calculations, the weight of leading people who might turn against you at any moment. Damien considered the question seriously, longer than she expected. Every single day, he admitted quietly. But it is the life I was given, and abandoning it would mean abandoning people who depend on me for stability they cannot find elsewhere. So I continue, tired as I often am, because the alternative feels far worse. Elena nodded slowly, understanding, in a way she had not fully appreciated before, the isolated weight Damien carried behind his careful composure, a burden made heavier, perhaps, by how rarely he allowed himself to share it honestly with anyone. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for. Damien glanced at her, something soft and unguarded flickering briefly across his expression, before he composed himself again. Thank you, Elena, he said. That means more than you probably realize. They remained at the park a while longer, the conversation drifting into easier, lighter territory, and for a brief, quiet hour, the looming shadow of danger surrounding them both seemed to recede just enough to allow something new and unexpected to take root between them. The weeks that followed settled into an uneasy calm. Elena continued her shifts at the diner. Damien visited when he could, and the dark sedan remained a quiet, reassuring presence near the parking lot each night. But calm, Elena had begun to learn, rarely lasted long in the world Damien occupied, and the peace of those weeks shattered abruptly on a Thursday evening when she stepped outside for her usual break and found the sedan gone, its parking spot empty. No note, no explanation, only unsettling absence where steady presence had been. She tried calling the number Damien had given her, but it rang unanswered. Her unease grew steadily as the evening wore on, and by the time her shift ended near midnight, she found herself walking home with careful, deliberate attention to every shadow, every parked car, every unfamiliar sound. She was halfway down her street when a car pulled slowly alongside her, its window lowering, to reveal a face she did not recognize, calm and pleasant, in a way that immediately struck her as wrong. "Elena Marsh?" the man asked politely. She did not answer, instead quickening her pace toward her house, her heart hammering loudly in her chest. The car matched her speed easily, its engine humming low and patient. "I only want to ask a few questions," the man continued, his voice still calm, still pleasant, though something beneath the surface carried an unmistakable edge. "About a night at your diner some weeks ago." Elena did not respond, breaking into a run toward her front door, fumbling for her keys with shaking hands. Behind her, she heard the car door open, footsteps following quickly, and just as she reached her porch, a hand closed firmly around her arm. "There's no need for this to become difficult," the man said quietly. Before Elena could react further, headlights swept suddenly across the street, and a second car screeched to a stop directly behind the first. Two men emerged quickly, moving with the same practiced, controlled urgency she remembered from that first night at the diner. The stranger holding her arm released his grip instantly, stepping back with his hands raised slightly, his calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal genuine alarm. "This does not concern you," he said quickly to the newly arrived men. "It concerns us entirely," one of them replied evenly, positioning himself between Elena and the stranger with practiced calm. Elena stumbled backward toward her porch steps, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, watching as the stranger retreated quickly to his car, offering no further argument, disappearing swiftly down the street, with tires screeching against the pavement. Her phone rang moments later, and she answered with trembling hands. "Elena," Damien's voice came through immediately, tight with urgency and barely restrained anger. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she managed. "Someone grabbed my arm. Your men. They arrived just in time." "I am on my way," Damien said. "Do not go inside alone. Wait for me on your porch, in view of the street." He arrived within 20 minutes, stepping quickly from his car, his expression carrying a rawness Elena had not seen from him before, something closer to fear than his usual careful composure allowed. "I should never have left your protection unmanned tonight," he said, sitting beside her on the porch steps, his hands hovering near hers, as though wanting to offer comfort, but uncertain if it would be welcome. "There was an emergency elsewhere, a complication I needed to address personally. I made the wrong choice leaving you unwatched, even briefly." "It's not your fault," Elena said, though her voice still trembled slightly. "It is entirely my fault," Damien said firmly. "You are in danger because of your connection to me. I cannot allow carelessness to put you at further risk." Elena studied him carefully, noticing the tension in his jaw, the barely controlled anger simmering just beneath his calm exterior. "Who was that man?" she asked. "Someone working for Callum Gray." "Almost certainly," Damien said. "Gray has clearly not accepted his removal from the council as quietly as I had hoped. If he is sending people to question you directly, it means he suspects, or perhaps already knows, exactly how his plan failed." "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice steadier now, though fear still lingered close beneath the surface. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the dark street beyond her porch. "Now," he said finally, "I stop being cautious about protecting you from a distance, and I bring you somewhere I can ensure your safety directly." Elena opened her mouth to protest, the same reluctance from weeks earlier rising instinctively within her, but the memory of the stranger's hand closing around her arm silenced the objection before it fully formed. "All right," she said quietly. Tell me what that looks like. Damien's expression softened slightly, relief and lingering worry mixing together across his features. My estate, he said. Secured, guarded, protected in ways your home simply cannot be. You would not be a prisoner there, Elena. You would have freedom, space, and safety, all at once. And my job? Elena asked. My life? Temporary, Damien said again, though this time the word carried more weight, more urgency, given everything that had just occurred. Until Gray and whoever supports him are fully dealt with. Elena looked out at the quiet street, still faintly illuminated by the retreating taillights of the stranger's car, and felt, for the first time since this entire situation began, a genuine acceptance of just how deeply her life had already changed. Okay, she said quietly. I'll come. Damien exhaled slowly, something in his shoulders easing for the first time since he'd arrived. Thank you, he said softly. I promise you, Elena, I will make certain this ends soon, and safely. She nodded, though the uncertainty of everything still ahead settled heavily over her chest, and as Damien helped her gather a few essential belongings from her small, familiar house, she found herself wondering, with a strange mixture of fear and quiet anticipation, exactly what kind of life awaited her within the walls of a world she had only glimpsed from its dangerous edges until now. The estate sat at the end of a long, tree-lined drive, hidden from the main road by tall hedges and a quiet, unassuming gate that gave little indication of the scale of what lay beyond it. Elena had expected grandeur, and the estate certainly possessed it. Wide stone steps leading up to a heavy front door, tall windows catching the evening light, gardens stretching in careful, deliberate patterns across the surrounding grounds. But what struck her most was the quiet order of it all. Guards positioned at careful intervals along the perimeter, their presence subtle but unmistakable. The entire property arranged with the same careful attention to safety that Damien brought to every conversation. This will be your room, Damien said, leading her through wide hallways to a comfortable, well-furnished space overlooking the gardens. You are free to move throughout the house and grounds as you wish. The guards are here for your protection, not to restrict you. Elena set her small bag down on the neatly made bed, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with a mixture of gratitude and lingering unease. This is a lot to adjust to, she admitted. I know, Damien said gently. Take whatever time you need. And Elena, please know that my door is always open if you have questions, or simply want company. Over the following days, Elena settled slowly into the rhythm of the estate, learning the names of the staff who worked there, sharing quiet meals with Damien, in the evenings when his responsibilities allowed, gradually growing more comfortable, within walls that had initially felt so foreign to her. She met Corin, fully recovered now, who greeted her with genuine warmth and gratitude, clearly aware of exactly what she had prevented on that night at the diner. You saved my life too, you know, Corin told her one afternoon, as they shared coffee in the estate's sunlit kitchen. I was the one who drank from that glass. If you hadn't switched it earlier, it would have been meant for Damien instead of accidentally reaching me. Either way, your instincts that night saved someone. I'm just glad you're okay, Elena said honestly. Damien doesn't easily trust people, Corin added, studying her carefully. But he trusts you. That's rare, Elena, rarer than you probably realize. Elena found herself thinking about those words often in the days that followed, watching the way Damien's careful composure softened slightly whenever she entered a room, the way his tired eyes seemed to carry a little less weight during their quiet evening conversations. Their relationship, born from danger and gratitude, had grown steadily into something neither of them had fully named aloud, though both seemed increasingly aware of its presence. The investigation into Callum Gray's remaining allies continued quietly in the background, Damien occasionally disappearing for hours at a time, to attend tense meetings Elena was not permitted to witness, returning each time with the same careful, controlled exhaustion that told her progress was being made, slowly, cautiously, exactly as he had promised. It was nearly 3 weeks into her stay, when Damien found her in the estate's quiet library one evening, her nose buried in one of the many books lining the tall shelves. I have news, he said, settling into the chair across from her. We have identified everyone who supported Gray's plan. All of them have been removed from positions of influence. Gray himself has left the region entirely, understanding, correctly, that remaining would only invite further consequences. Elena set her book down carefully, studying his face. So it's over? Largely, yes, Damien said, though something in his voice carried lingering caution. There will always be some risk in my world, Elena, but the immediate danger surrounding you has passed. You are free to return to your previous life, if that is what you wish. The words settled heavily between them, and Elena found herself surprised by the reluctance that rose within her at the thought of leaving, at the thought of returning to her small house, her quiet diner shifts, a life that now felt, strangely, smaller than the one she had grown accustomed to within these walls. Is that what you want? She asked quietly. For me to leave? Damien's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering briefly across his usually composed features. No, he admitted softly. It is not what I want at all. But I did not wish to assume you felt the same, or to pressure you into staying simply because leaving might disappoint me. Elena felt her heart quicken slightly at his honesty, an answering warmth spreading through her chest that she had been quietly, carefully ignoring for weeks now. I don't want to leave either, she said softly. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Damien's careful composure broke fully then, a genuine, unguarded smile spreading slowly across his tired features, the first Elena had seen from him since that very first strange night at the diner. Then stay, he said simply, for as long as you wish. Outside the library windows, the estate's gardens stretched quietly beneath the fading evening light, calm and settled in a way that mirrored, however cautiously, the quiet peace beginning to take root between them, born from danger, grown through gratitude, and blooming now, slowly, into something neither of them had expected to find within the careful, dangerous walls of Damien Voss's world. Life at the estate settled into something Elena had never expected to find comfortable, and yet, day by day, it became exactly that. She began accompanying Damien to smaller gatherings, careful, quiet meetings with allies, who studied her with open curiosity, before gradually warming to her steady, unpretentious presence. She learned to navigate conversations about matters far outside her original experience, offering, more often than she expected, insights that surprised even Damien's most seasoned advisors. You have a way of noticing what others overlook, Damien told her one evening, as they walked slowly through the gardens after a particularly tense meeting with a neighboring alliance. The same instinct that noticed a poisoned glass seems to notice far more than most people around me ever bother to see. I just pay attention, Elena said simply. Years of reading rooms full of strangers teaches you that, eventually. It is a skill I value more than you realize, Damien admitted. Most people around me tell me only what they believe I want to hear. You tell me what you actually think, even when it differs from my own opinion. Their relationship deepened steadily through such moments. Quiet conversations shared over evening meals, careful trust built gradually through consistent honesty rather than grand declarations. Elena found herself, increasingly, looking forward to Damien's return each evening, from whatever difficult meetings occupied his days, and she noticed, with quiet warmth, the way his tired eyes seemed to soften the moment he found her waiting. It was during a quiet dinner, several weeks after Damien's confirmation that the immediate danger had passed, that he set down his fork carefully and studied her with an expression more serious than she had seen from him in some time. Elena, he said, I need to ask you something important. All right, she said, setting down her own utensils, giving him her full attention. When this began, you saved my life without knowing anything about me, expecting nothing in return, Damien said carefully. Since then, you have remained here, patient through danger, curious about a world entirely foreign to your own, and steady through every difficulty that world has brought to your doorstep. I find myself, increasingly, unable to imagine this life continuing without you in it. Elena's heart quickened, warmth spreading through her chest as she listened. What are you asking exactly? She said softly, though she suspected, hopefully, that she already understood. I am asking if you would consider remaining here not simply as someone I am protecting, or someone I am grateful toward, but as someone I wish to build a life alongside, Damien said, his usual careful composure giving way to something rawer, more honest than she had ever witnessed from him. I understand this is unconventional, given how we met, and given the world I inhabit, but I have not felt this certain about anything in a very long time. Elena reached across the table, taking his hand gently in hers, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers that betrayed the vulnerability hidden beneath his careful words. I think, she said slowly, That somewhere between switching that glass and sitting here now, I stopped seeing you as a stranger I happened to help, and started seeing you as someone I genuinely care about. Damien's expression softened entirely, relief and quiet joy mixing openly across his tired features. Then you would consider staying, he said, not quite a question anymore. I would consider it very seriously, Elena said, smiling gently. Their conversation continued long into the evening, careful and honest, discussing openly the complications that remained, the lingering dangers inherent to Damien's world, the adjustments Elena would need to navigate in building a life so different from the one she had always known. Neither of them pretended the path ahead would be simple, but both recognized, clearly now, that whatever difficulties remained, they intended to face them together. In the weeks that followed, Elena gradually introduced her own small, steady presence into the wider rhythms of the estate, earning the quiet respect of staff and allies alike, not through grand gestures, but through the same steady honesty and careful attention that had first caught Damien's notice on that fateful night at the diner. Corin, in particular, grew close to her, teasing her gently about how thoroughly she had disrupted Damien's carefully guarded solitude. "I've never seen him this settled," Corin admitted one afternoon. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm not doing anything special," Elena said, laughing softly. "I'm just being myself." "Exactly," Corin said. "That's precisely the point." As the immediate danger of Gray's betrayal faded further into the past, replaced by careful, ongoing vigilance rather than acute fear, Elena found herself settling more fully into a life she had never anticipated, built not on the foundation of the world she had left behind, but on the quiet, growing partnership she had found within the world she had once entered so reluctantly. Months passed, and the estate that had once felt so foreign to Elena had gradually become simply home, its quiet gardens and careful guards, no longer strange sights but familiar, comforting parts of her daily life. The danger surrounding Damien had not vanished entirely, careful vigilance remaining a constant part of their world, but the acute fear of those early weeks had settled into something steadier, more manageable, more like the ordinary caution of people who understood the risks around them and had learned to live fully despite them. Damien had called a gathering, larger than the small, careful meetings Elena had grown accustomed to attending, bringing together allies and advisors from across the wider network he oversaw. Elena stood beside him now, in the estate's largest hall, dressed carefully, her nerves steady, despite the unfamiliar formality of the occasion, watching as familiar and unfamiliar faces alike settled into their seats. "Many of you know the story already," Damien began, his voice carrying easily across the quiet hall. "But I wish to say it plainly, in front of everyone gathered here today. Some months ago, an attempt was made on my life, one that very nearly succeeded, had it not been for the quiet instincts of a woman who owed me nothing, expected nothing, and acted simply because something felt wrong to her." Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly as attention shifted toward her, though she kept her posture steady, meeting the curious, respectful gazes around the room with quiet confidence rather than discomfort. "Elena Marsh saved my life that night," Damien continued, "without knowing who I was, without any expectation of reward. In the months since, she has shown herself to possess wisdom, honesty, and steadiness that I value as much as any advisor within this room. I wish for all of you to understand, clearly, and without ambiguity, that she is not simply someone under my protection. She is someone I intend to build my life alongside, someone whose place within our world is now permanent, and someone deserving of the same respect and loyalty you extend to me." A quiet murmur of approval spread through the gathered hall, and Corin, seated near the front, offered Elena a broad, genuine smile that eased whatever lingering nerves remained in her chest. After the gathering concluded, and the hall slowly emptied, Damien led Elena out into the quiet evening gardens, the same gardens where their relationship had first begun to deepen so many months earlier. The evening air carried the soft scent of blooming flowers, and overhead, the first stars had begun to emerge against the darkening sky. "I meant every word," Damien said quietly, taking her hand gently in his. "You changed everything for me, Elena, not simply by saving my life, but by showing me what it means to be seen honestly, without calculation or hidden motive. You changed things for me too," Elena said softly. "I never expected any of this, not the danger, not the estate, and certainly not you. But I wouldn't trade any of it now." Damien smiled, the tired weight he so often carried easing visibly from his shoulders as he studied her in the soft evening light. "There will still be difficulties ahead," he said honestly. "My world does not offer permanent peace, only careful, ongoing vigilance." "I know," Elena said, "but I'd rather face those difficulties standing beside you than watch them from a distance." They stood together quietly in the gardens as the stars slowly filled the darkening sky above them, the estate's careful guards maintaining their steady, watchful presence along the distant perimeter, a quiet reminder of the dangerous world they still inhabited, but one that no longer felt overwhelming, only familiar, manageable, shared. What had begun as a single quiet decision, a waitress noticing something wrong and acting without hesitation, without knowing the weight of what she was about to change, had grown steadily into something neither of them could have anticipated that ordinary Tuesday night. A life saved, a trust built, a partnership formed between two people from entirely different worlds, brought together by danger, and held together, ultimately, by the same quiet honesty that had started it all. Damien no longer needed silence to know Elena was watching over him. She stood openly beside him now, steady and unwavering, no longer a stranger who had simply switched a glass in a quiet diner, but a woman who had become, fully and completely, an essential part of his life, his safety, and his heart. And as the evening deepened around them, the gardens quiet and peaceful beneath the emerging stars, both of them understood, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever challenges the future might still hold, they would face them together, side by side, exactly as they had chosen to, from that very first quiet act of instinct that had changed everything.